Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at The Roost again. My name's Anna Palmer. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Punchbowl News. Thank you for those joining us on the live stream this morning. A big thank you to Google, who partnered with us on the larger Leaders Project and is partnering with us on this event. For those of you who haven't seen it, but hopefully you all have, The Leaders was a project that Punchbowl News endeavored to look at 4 different leaders at the federal, state, and local level about how they were helping their communities come out of COVID and really thinking about the small businesses, the economic engines, and what is the future of that for different states and parts of the country. This morning, we are going to be joined by Representative Nancy Mace, the Republican from South Carolina, one of those members that we profile to talk about news of the day, as well as what she's seeing in Charleston and the surrounding area that she represents in terms of the economy coming out of COVID. And afterwards, I'm going to be joined by Mark Osakowicz, Vice President of Government Affairs and Public Policy for U.S. and Canada for Google. A quick reminder, we'd love for you to share this event on social media. You can find Punchbowl News at Punchbowl News on all social media platforms. And with that, I'm going to welcome Brendan Peterson, our financial services reporter, to join me for the moderating, as well as Congresswoman Mace, please. Thank you, thank you. All right, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
We are going to start, as we always do, with a few news of the day questions. It's Washington, so
you're just jumping right in.
No, we got a lot to cover. Yeah. So I'm going to tip it over to Brendan here to talk a little bit about what else? The debt limit.
Debt ceiling, yeah.
So the Big Four met last night on Tuesday to talk all things debt limit. There are negotiations at the staff level continuing through today. How concerned are you that we are 2 weeks away from a potential default on U.S. debt?
Well, this is like being in college and studying for the final exams the night before, and we're all chugging Red Bull, right? We've had months to have this conversation, to have this negotiation, and now we're doing it in the 11th hour. And if default was on the table, and I don't think it is, and I would argue that it's not, and we don't have to default. But if it were, if that is the dire straits that we are in today, then why would the president leave the country to go to another nation when this should be our priority? And so, to me, it's like they've had all the time in the world, and it was Republicans and Democrats that put us in this debacle. So it's Republicans and Democrats that should be at the table negotiating to get us out of it. And there is precedent where we've had a Democrat president and a Republican-controlled House. In 1994, there was a plan to balance the budget over 10 years. They did it in 4 under President Clinton. Now, they had a surplus. They were flush with cash, and they could do that, but they had a 10-year plan. They got it done sooner. Under President Obama, we had cut, cap, and balance. They used sequesters to sort of rein in spending. But in the last couple of years, it's just gotten so out of control. Under Donald Trump, he added $8 trillion to the debt. Under President Joe Biden today, in the last 2 years, $4 trillion. That's $12 trillion over the last 6 years. And we cannot continue down this path. We have to make some cuts, or at least hit pause on the amount of spending that we're doing right now in order to flush this thing out. And, I have a plan that would balance the budget in 5 years. That's a bit aggressive for Washington. Probably never going to happen. It's a pipe dream. But, hell, at this point, I would take 20 years. Just show the American people what is the plan going to be? How are both sides going to hold each other accountable and not go off the cliff? I think it's a reasonable request.
You said that default is off the table. If we do default, I wanted to ask if you think
we don't have to. We have 11 times the revenue of the interest on the debt. The money is there. You just have to prioritize spending.
I agree.
No.
But if we hit that point of X-date default, do your fellow House Republicans worry that they will shoulder the blame in the public theater?
I think there should be worry on both sides on how this thing shakes out. One day it's our fault, the next day it's the left's fault. I mean, this thing is ping-ponging back and forth, and it feels like we're playing chicken with the economy. And for the love of God, there are families right now that are living paycheck to paycheck. And you go to the grocery store, you buy gas. I just spent almost $4 a gallon for gas the other day. It's back up again. But when you look at the expenses that every American family has right now. The household debt is twice what it was a year ago. And yet the federal government just spends like drunken sailors. And Republicans only care about the debt when Democrats are in charge, right? And so it's a bunch of BS. Like, get it together. Both sides caused it. Both sides should fix it. And I just don't understand why we can't have a conversation about how do we balance the budget in 20 years. That is a huge compromise that I would take. And we can't even, blasphemy, we're going to default. Like, that's just so irresponsible and immature. They need to grow up, and they need to get to the table and fix it.
One last question on the debt limit. I think the X factor here is we have the staff negotiations at the senior level. It seems like both sides know what the contours of a deal could look like. I think the X factor is Donald Trump. How much and how big of a role do you think he plays with your fellow House Republicans in terms of saying you shouldn't vote for anything?
Well, I mean, how big is the X factor for Joe Biden? I mean, he is the president. I mean, he has not come to the table to negotiate with Republicans. We've known about this limit and the deadline for months now. So I think the media likes to keep blaming and bringing up Donald Trump, but also Joe Biden's out there. I mean, he literally said he would never negotiate. Now we're in the 11th hour negotiating. It didn't have to come down to this. I do think that there are influences on both sides. Like, if the president of the United States is saying he's not going to negotiate, then the Democrat caucus isn't going to vote for a responsible debt ceiling hike. And the same thing goes for our side. If we have a leader within our party that says, hey, no deal, then how are they going to vote? And I think it's past time that people kind of put the party hat aside and do what's right for the country. Do what's right for America and Americans and put our nation first, and that means figuring this thing out, doing whatever it takes to fix it.
Moving away from the economy for just a second, you have spoken at some length about Republican stances on abortion that are extreme, and you have
Every day.
And you've introduced legislation to improve access to over-the-counter contraceptives. Do you expect a vote on that this year? How do we get to a deal?
I don't know on timing of that bill. I do have a bill that cuts the red tape. I have a rape kit bill. I've got several pieces of legislation. A couple of them I will be getting support from leadership on. Now, when that happens, some of it's on me. So like my rape kit bill, we're still working through making sure we dot every I, cross every T, so we don't get any resistance in the Senate. I don't want to vote on something, have it go to the Senate, and fail. So we're working hard to make sure that it's meaningful legislation that can get to the president's desk to be signed into law. And some of the bills that we're talking about that you're bringing up, the president also has expressed some support. His administration has called us on a couple of those things. And so that is very encouraging to us as well. But I want to make sure that it can cross the finish line too. And that's why I try to I have one voice, I have one vote, and I want to make sure that I'm using it for good, because abortion is going to be a huge issue. And I saw what happened in 22. We lost seats we should have won, and it didn't have to be that way. And I'm not talking about anything controversial. I'm talking about birth control access, rape and incest exceptions, very reasonable, responsible things, and then I get labeled a baby killer. And so we're just in this really weird spot where I'm just going to triple down, because I know where the vast majority of people are, and if we don't wake up to the fact that we can't continue being assholes to women, we've got to show some compassion, then we're going to continue to lose seats. Because I'm in a bellwether district, in a purple district, and still today, abortion is the number 2 issue. Number 1 is inflation in the economy, but number 2 is abortion. People are going to vote on this issue. And we have to show, one, where do we stand? What's the policy? I think we can talk about foster care. What do we do with the children who are unwanted and are born? What are we going to do? How do we improve adoption services? How do we make sure that women in rural areas and urban areas have access to birth control? We have 14 counties in South Carolina without a single OBGYN doctor. And so it's kind of crazy to me. But, I know some Republicans don't want to vote on birth control, but I don't care. Like, we need to do the right thing and show that if we're going to be serious about saving lives, then let's be serious about reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies so that those abortions don't happen. And that, I'll hear, well, women have access to birth control. No, they don't. And in some areas they don't, because they don't have an OBGYN doctor nearby. And my conservative governor of South Carolina last year, with a state senator from my district, State Senator Tom Davis, they passed state legislation to give women access to the pill from the pharmacist. So we've got to continue that level of of policy at the federal level as well, and push that ball forward and realize that we can win hearts and minds by showing some compassion.
One last topic here, another big one for a lot of voters, gun legislation. The U.S. continues to be plagued by mass shootings, most recently in Texas. Nashville, you've seen some local legislation move forward. As part of your vote for the GOP debt limit package, you asked Speaker Kevin McCarthy for a vote on gun control legislation. What does that bill do, and do you have an update on what's going to happen there?
I would not categorize it as gun control. Gun violence legislation is the way I would. Anytime I say gun violence, people immediately think I'm talking about gun control, and I'm not. But the active shooter alert that Congressman Cicilline did last year, we're going to do a version of that bill that we'll file in the next couple of weeks. We're working on the language to, again, make sure that I don't want any hiccups. I want to dot my I's and cross my T's. I want it to be able to pass out of the House and the Senate. Again, I don't want it to be a messaging bill, but we're losing on the policy front on gun violence. And unfortunately, my district is no stranger to mass shootings. We had Mother Emanuel almost 8 years ago, where a white supremacist bought a gun and murdered 9 black church members. Just over a year ago, there were over 30 shots fired in a parking lot next to a Little League baseball game. There were soccer fields near that parking lot where my kids practice soccer for school. And I'm a suburban mom. Like, I worry when I'm in the carpool line, I'm dropping my kids off at school about their safety and their security. Is our school next? And so I feel those concerns every time I see a mass shooting. It's palpable. And then just a few weeks ago, my kids and I were leaving the house, and we left at 5:30. Unbeknownst to us, at 5:24 in the evening, there were 6 people shot a mile from our house. And thankfully, the police were there because there were it was like senior skip day. A bunch of kids were outside on the beach and everything. And the police saved all 6 lives. But we didn't know it was happening. 6 minutes into the shooting, we were a block from the shooting. We were in our car, and we saw all the police cars coming on to the community, the neighborhood where we live, and the EMS, and we didn't know what was going on. But as soon as I called the mayor and I found out within minutes, the first thing my children said to me, "Hey, Mommy, where's the Amber Alert to tell us that we're near a mass shooting? And maybe not leave the house or take cover." So out of, the mouths of babes, to hear them, such common sense, our kids, and they're teenagers too, but they have such common sense. And to think that Republicans resisted this legislation last year, it got passed out of the House and it failed in the Senate. To think that we can't do this has nothing to do with law-abiding citizens and their right to carry a gun. It has everything to do with keeping our communities and our kids safe. And so, small parts, big difference. We have to acknowledge that there's a problem. When Nashville happened, the GOP offered Easter baskets. I'm sorry, what? Like, this is not really a tone-deaf message. And so we have to acknowledge, number one, there's a problem. And then number two, have these very difficult conversations about why the violence is happening. And it's not easy. It's very complex. I mean, when we were all growing up, I know in my neighborhood, kids had rifles in their cars because they were hunters. They were going to go hunting after school, but they didn't pick up the gun and go shoot their teachers and their friends. So something has dramatically changed. And a lot of mental health hospitals have been shut down. I went to the largest jail in the state a few weeks ago, and it's in Charleston, and half the inmates are mental health cases. Our law enforcement weren't trained for that. And it's a very complex issue, but it's something that we have to address.
All right, let's talk about the leaders. Thank you for being one of our profilees that we looked at and talked to. Brendan spent some time with you looking at South Carolina's low country. You represent parts of Charleston, which has long played a key role as a port city, has been home to manufacturers like Boeing, Mercedes-Benz plants. Can you first just kind of set the stage for this conversation for how COVID impacted businesses in your district?
We saw governments, federal, state, and local, shut down businesses. Now, in South Carolina, we were not shut down for that long. We reopened fairly quickly, but even that temporary shutdown affected our operations, manufacturing, exports, imports, et cetera. One thing that our port did that other ports did not is through COVID-19, we actually had our gates running 24/7. So like you saw Long Beach with their unions shut down the port and they weren't doing gate turns 24/7. We did. We were still able to deepen our port during COVID-19. And so we've put ourselves in a very good position to help with supply chain issues because we still have supply chain issues. I was at the grocery store like 2 weeks ago with the kids and I saw a couple empty shelves. I'm like, how do we still have empty shelves this far out of COVID? But apparently we still do. But with inflation, supply chain is a huge issue. And one of the things that we have to look at improving in order to bring inflation down too and the cost of goods down. But I'm really proud of the state of South Carolina. We didn't shut down for as long. I'm proud of our port. I'm proud of our manufacturers that got people back to work. But when we paid to send people home during COVID, it really hurt our manufacturing, it hurt our supply chain. It really hurt small businesses. And the port really is dependent on small businesses. An entire South Carolina economy is dependent on those small businesses. And so to see how those factors have impacted employment, I mean, we struggle with hiring employees right now. Now with larger firms laying people off, I think that will get a little bit easier for small businesses to pick up the pieces and pick up, we had a big plant shut down a couple weeks ago, and I know those employers are going to find work because there's so much work, available work, if they don't end up on the unemployment line. But it certainly affected our operations. But we did a really good job of staying open and staying in business, and I'm proud of South Carolina for doing that.
When we spoke for the leader's profile that I wrote, you talked a little bit about how Charleston is becoming a hub for innovation. And can you walk us through that in terms of the biotech stuff that's happening, the fintech, any startup, anything?
We have the Low Country, South Carolina, it's full of entrepreneurs. A lot of people don't go into the office. A lot of folks are CEOs or they're executives or they work from home. And so we have a lot of entrepreneurship, budding entrepreneurs. And so we have a lot of startups, a lot more startups now than ever, and especially because of COVID. And we had folks from New York that are coming down to South Carolina or California or the Northeast, Massachusetts. We have Ohio is another one. We have all these folks coming from around the country that don't have to have an office, that have their own businesses or work for themselves or are entrepreneurs. And we have some really innovative tech that's happening. And we're at obviously the hottest topic right now is AI. There's a startup in our district that uses machine learning, and they started with this kind of big machine, and they measure blink rates. They can diagnose concussions. They can diagnose someone with Parkinson's disease or ADHD or a number of neurological illnesses. And so now they've got it down to like an iPhone. They can measure it. I mean, and so to see the kind of technology and the innovation that's happening, I went to an event a few weeks ago with FinTech. Every week when I go back home, I'm hearing about more VC folks that are coming into town that are hosting companies or looking for investments and things to invest in. And it's really become this hub of entrepreneurship, which is interesting to see that happening. There's a lot of investment in businesses, but you're seeing companies from around the country make those investments in companies in our state, which is different. We've not had a lot of that over the years, but with COVID and people fleeing big cities and coming to small innovative towns, that's where they head to Charleston. If they didn't make it to Miami, they went to Charleston.
Let's talk about that. I mean, we often talk to kind of lawmakers, go around the country talking about what are the regulations that are needed, what are the regulations that should be lifted, right? Particularly when it comes to small businesses and the economy. What are things that you either think Congress should be regulating or should they just get out of the way?
Yeah, well, one of the things we don't talk about in the conversation about inflation is regulation. When you over-regulate an industry, the costs go up for the consumer. And in the state of South Carolina, this is an example, you have to be licensed to hang wallpaper. Okay, what? I can't understand why that would be a thing. Here in DC, you have to have a college degree to be work in the child care space. That doesn't really, that's just an undue burden that's unnecessary and only adds to the cost to the consumer. And so one of the overlooked things are regulations when and healthcare would be a great example. When the government really gets its fingers in the pie, that overregulation has made the cost of healthcare significantly rise year over year. We do have to look at ways. I do like, love them or hate them, I do like one of the policies of the former president for every new regulation you repeal two, and looking at ways to make the cost of things simpler. I know, like during COVID, another example would be that you couldn't close on your home if it didn't have a certain grade, like metal on the water meter or something like that. And of course, you couldn't get that grade of metal or plastic on the water meter because we had supply chain issues. And so we saw a bottleneck in the real estate market. But, you know, oftentimes the government is the last one to really see how to make things more efficient. It's much better done in industry and business because the bottom line, they have to make their bottom line and have to have a good profit and loss statement, a good budget. But the government, no one ever holds them accountable. So they do these onerous regulations. The other thing that we're seeing today is we're seeing agencies interpret regulations in a different way than it has in the past. One of the issues is the right whale issue with the boating industry. And you know, what that might do to the boating industry. Obviously, we want to save the right whales and we want to save the boating industry, and I think you can do both at the same time, but we're seeing the interpretation of regulations in a more extreme fashion than before, but it's come at a great cost, especially during inflation. Less is more right now. Again, on AI, everyone was talking about we got to regulate AI, got to regulate. I think that there is a risk to over-regulating AI and then getting behind China, but also the risk is you're going to stifle innovation. If you stifle innovation, you're going to lose more jobs than you otherwise would have. So we just have to be thoughtful about over-regulating any kind of market.
All right, we are quickly running out of time. I have one last question. I'm going to leave the last to Brendan here, but I want to project forward 5 years, right? If you think about all of this exciting things that you're talking about happening in your state when it comes to business, the economy, what's your hope for South Carolina 5 years from now?
I love South Carolina. I think we have dealt with the challenges as a state as a whole better than almost any other state. I'm really proud of our leadership, our governor, Henry McMaster, and even our state house leaders in fighting through the challenges that we had coming out of COVID-19, balancing the budget every year as a state and being thoughtful about the resources that we have and how we expend them as a government. I would like us, and I think, continue to lead the nation in everything that we're doing, showing that you can survive a pandemic in the way that we did. You can balance healthcare and keeping people safe with the market, the economy, with jobs. And we've done a great job for that. There are things that I think we can always improve. Education, we're like last in education and number one in STDs. I don't know how that works, but there are some things we got to fix.
That was not on my bingo card this morning.
No, it's not. But, you know, we're behind Mississippi in education. And yet, you know, we're right middle of the road, 24th, 25th in the amount we spend per student in education. Yet we fall almost dead last. And again, the cost of government, the bureaucracy at the top taking precedent over teachers and kids, you got to reverse that. Teachers need to get paid more. Kids need to have need to get education. That needs to be the priority, not the bureaucracy and the red tape and everything else. We do things in education that, you know, we don't. If you have a master's degree or a PhD, you can't just walk into a job in your specialty. You've got to get all the certification, yet you got your PhD. Like, you should be qualified to teach communications if your PhD's in communications. So there are some things that I would like to see us improve over the next 5 years and really be the bulwark, be like this shining star in education if we can get there. But again, sometimes government gets in the way. Again, over-regulating how a teacher can be certified to teach is one of those ways. My mom's an educator and a teacher, former teacher, and she's here somewhere with me today in the back. And thank you, Mom. I love you. But we've done such a great job. I mean, I just am really proud to be South Carolinian and to represent South Carolina in Congress. It's a huge honor.
All right, our last question. You probably knew this was coming. 2024, we're in the thick of it. Your home state, South Carolina, important state as far as these things go.
Why are we ending? Why are you ambushing me on the last one?
Your home state Senator Tim Scott is probably going to run for president. Do you support Tim Scott for president?
I support, gosh, man, I love... I have two constituents who are going to be running, and I love them both. I have not weighed in on 2024 yet. I've kind of wear my heart on my sleeve. I want to see a woman on the ticket. I think it's past time. I don't want Democrats to beat us to the punch on a female president. I have a daughter. I'm a girl mom, and I've worked really hard to break glass ceilings, so I'm very proud of Nikki. She's all in for the presidency. I love Tim Scott. I go to church with Tim Scott. He is the nicest human on earth. And I think it's amazing to see the leadership, the quality of leadership that is coming out of the state of South Carolina. I'm going to wait to weigh in until I see how the dust settles and who's in and who's not. And it's still very early in the race right now.
All right, we'll come back to this in a few months. So maybe make sure to break that news in Punchbowl News. All right, Congresswoman Mace, thank you so much this morning. We appreciate it. Brendan, thank you so much. All right, now I'd like to welcome Mark Osakowicz, Vice President of Government Affairs and Public Policy, U.S. and Canada, to the stage. Mark. Thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, we are very excited to have Google as a supporter of the Leaders, a project where Punchbowl News dug deeper on how elected leaders at all different levels are trying to kind of help their economic engines of their states coming out of COVID. I want to talk a little bit about the role Google is playing when it comes to creating the infrastructure the workforce is going to need in high tech going forward.
I think what was interesting about the great series that you did with the leaders is every one of the 4 people you highlighted have different anchor industries in their states. In this case, you just talked about Boeing and Mercedes. The other governors and members of Congress had different, but they all have something in common in those interviews that Brendan did. They all want to diversify their infrastructure, maybe have some tech companies in. They all want to have a vibrant small business ecosystem, and they want to have a trained workforce. And I'm very proud that Google is a part of all those things. So we're thought of as a California company, but we're actually a South Carolina company, an Ohio company, and a Texas company. We have offices and data centers in 26 different states. And what happens inside of those data centers, people just think it's miles and miles of servers, but that's how we do power the AI that Congresswoman Mace was talking about. That's how we offer cloud services to businesses, and that's how we become part of local communities. And then in terms of the small business ecosystem, our economic impact report, our estimate is that we contribute $701 billion of economic activities for small businesses, publishers, YouTube creators, developers on the Play Store. And then we also, through our career certificates, also offer a pathway to be trained for the jobs of the future. So we felt very good about reading that series and that we have a contribution to make in all of the areas that all 4 of them talked about.
So AI, obviously a hot topic. The Congresswoman brought it up. It's something that we are kind of constantly looking at, to regulate, to not regulate. How does Google look at kind of the opportunities when it comes to AI?
Well, look, we have said for some time, our CEO said it a few years ago, that AI is too important to not regulate, and it's too important to not regulate well. We have to be bold and responsible at the same time, and there's a tension between those 2 things. We have to be responsible first. People have questions about how do you know if something is a deep fake or something is real. Congresswoman Mace talked about a great South Carolina company that's doing work that will help on healthcare, but how do you also make sure that healthcare information is reliable? So we need to be responsible, but also the opportunities are enormous in healthcare, in small business, in nonprofits, in curing disease, in sustainability issues. And so we're going to have to do both at the same time, and we want to be at the center of that conversation. We've been very engaged here in town, eager to get feedback from members of Congress. It's hot this week. There's been a bunch of hearings, and we really want to lean into it. And we had our big show last week, our big developer conference, I/O, where we rolled out a whole bunch of products that people will be able to use. By the way, the one other thing I'll say about AI is, there's a lot of talk about it now because of our chatbot, Bard, and ChatGPT. But people have been using AI in our products and not thinking about it. So if you use Google Translate, or if you use Google Lens, or if you put in something in Google Maps and you see the traffic, those are all AI products built on data. And so this is an exciting time, and we're going to need to do both, be bold and responsible.
You talked about kind of the different areas that Google is a part of. You were recently in Ohio, opening a new data center there. Talk about that.
Well, that was exciting for me personally. As you know, Anna, that's my home state. So we already had one data center in New Albany. We had already bought land in Lancaster, Ohio, and in Columbus. We're going to open 2 more data centers there and really, again, be part of the ecosystem It allows us to power the tools you use every day, like search, Gmail, and Maps, but also expand our cloud offerings and go deeper on AI. So that was great. And it's interesting what's happened in Central Ohio. As you talk about economic change, you know, Intel has gone there to make chips. We have data centers there. Other tech companies do. And you see the economy changing over time. It's a different Columbus than the one I went to school in a while ago. So it's exciting to see, and it was great to be a part of it personally and do the announcement with Governor DeWine.
Let's talk about some of the future, kind of, as you think about Google's role in the economy. You all are doing a bunch of different programs. I think one of the interesting things I was reading about last night, the economic opportunity programs. Can you talk about Google's role there, what you're trying to do when it comes to economic opportunity programs?
So we have 9 career certificates. We just announced one with Governor Glenn Youngkin on cyber certs, cybersecurity career certificates. You can do these, get these certificates online in 3 to 6 months. It's very affordable. It's $150 to $300 total, depending on how fast you do the program. And we don't just say, look, here's your career certificate, but first of all, we have our own engineers design the program, and we work with a consortium of over 150 employers from Walmart to Amex to Colgate-Palmolive. So they will say, these employers in the consortium say, we will take the Google certificate, whether it's in project management or e-commerce or the cyber certs. So you can really come out of these courses in 3 to 6 months, and we want to put people on a pathway to get the jobs of the future. Maybe they have a 4-year degree, maybe they don't, but these certificates, about 150,000 people have completed them. 75% report a positive job result after they get the Google Cyber Cert. More and more elected officials I think you'll talk to are going to hear, look, I want to make sure that we have a vibrant higher education system, but I want my constituents to have these certificates in their pocket. Not just ours, other companies have them too, because these are the jobs of the future. And that's exciting. That can be very affordable. In big picture, Anna, we want to make the tech sector of the economy, it's about 10% of the GDP in the US, we want it to be accessible to people. We want people to know we're in 26 states. We want them to know you can get one of these certificates. We want them to know if you're a small business, you could have free tools. You know, there's a candle maker in South Carolina that is only an online presence and says repeatedly that Google's free tools is what allows him and his family to get word out about their business. We need to do more and more trainings. We have an organization called Grow with Google that has trained something like 9 million people, where you can come to workshops and learn how to use, you know, the business profile that you see in the square. That's not an advertisement. That's you put in the business, or you put in pizza near me, the information comes up. So we try to train small business people how to use these free tools. And again, it makes it more accessible. It's good for the country, but it's good for us too, because then people are stakeholders, realize they're stakeholders in the digital economy.
We're quickly running out of time, but I want to talk about, it's not just kind of training the workers of today. You are also have a program with 4-H, which is not the 4-H of my youth, which was more animals, but it sounds like you are doing computer science. Talk about that a little bit.
So we did an announcement in South Carolina. We also have done one in Ohio. Sorry to keep bringing things back to Ohio.
As a Midwesterner, I'm right here with you.
But often the 9 certificates I talked about, it can be, well, people of all ages can do it. It can be something you do later in life. But when you think about 4-H, what we've done is announcements with them for middle schoolers to do coding seminars and to do computer science education earlier. And so they've just been a great partner for us. We have our philanthropy is google.org. We partner with groups like 4-H. Again, that's the same kind of thing. We want to make sure that everybody in the United States understands they can be a stakeholder in this future. So the 4-H partnership has helped us get into middle schools, and so they may still be learning about agriculture and so forth, but they're also going to learn how to code if that's something they want to do.
Wonderful. All right, Mark, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, all of you, for joining us in person and on the live stream. A big thank you to Congresswoman Mace and her team as well. Have a great day and stay safe. Thanks so much.